Tonight, we unravel a story that feels ripped from a blockbuster movie. Yet, it's a stunning tale of real-life vindication. It's a story about a woman erased, a husband's public betrayal, and a spectacular comeback that no one saw coming. We follow the calculated parade of a new love designed to humiliate the woman left behind. But at the city's most glamorous charity gala, under the glare of 100 cameras, the script is flipped in the most dramatic way imaginable. The ghost of a past marriage returns not as a victim, but as royalty, ready to claim a future her ex-husband never thought she deserved. Stay with us as we reveal how one breathtaking entrance changed everything. The final meeting took place in a sterile conference room on the 47th floor of a glass tower overlooking Central Park. The view should have been magnificent, a sprawling tapestry of green and grey. But for Maya Carter, it was just a blur. The only thing in focus was the reflection in the polished mahogany table, a woman she barely recognized, hollowed out and pale, her sensible grey suit hanging off a frame that had shed 15 pounds from stress alone. Across from her, Cameron Frost, her husband of 10 years, looked impeccable. His silver and black suit was perfectly tailored. His Swiss watch gleamed under the recessed lighting, and his smile, that devastatingly charming smile that had once been her entire world, was now a weapon directed at her. Beside him, his lawyer, a shark in a pinstriped suit, shuffled papers with an air of bored finality. "It's a very generous offer," Maya, Cameron said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. It was the same voice that had whispered promises of forever in her ear, the same voice that had credited her for being his rock at company dinners. The apartment, a respectable settlement, enough for you to start over comfortably. Find a nice, quiet life. A quiet life. That's what he was relegating her to. She had been the co-architect of his empire, Frost Capital. For a decade, she had been the one behind the scenes. While he was the face, charming investors and closing deals, she was the engine. She'd managed the books in the early days, drafted the business plans, worked with the quiet, unassuming people who held the real power, and sacrificed her own career in architectural design to ensure his meteoric rise. She had been his partner in every sense of the word, until she was no longer convenient. The reason for her inconvenience was now a constant glittering presence on every gossip blog and social media feed. Audrey Bell, a model, an influencer, 20 years his junior, with impossibly long legs and a vacant photogenic pout. Cameron had paraded her around the city like a new trophy, taking her to the same restaurants he had taken Maya, even being photographed with her at the groundbreaking of a children's hospital wing that Maya had personally championed and fundraised for. The humiliation was a public spectacle, and it was entirely by design. "I believe the terms are clear," Maya's own lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed man named Robert, interjected softly. "We'd like a moment to discuss." Cameron waved a dismissive hand. "There's nothing to discuss. This is it. Sign the papers, Maya. Let's not drag this out and make it uglier than it already is." Uglier. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He had made it ugly. He had been the one to come home one Tuesday evening, smelling of a cloying, expensive perfume that wasn't hers, and announced that he was unfulfilled. He had said they had grown apart, that he needed passion and vibrancy in his life. He had used a string of meaningless corporate-speak clichés to dismantle a decade of shared life, of love and sacrifice. He never once mentioned Audrey's name. He didn't have to. The paparazzi had already done that for him. Maya looked at the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, and saw a complete stranger. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, transactional hardness. He wasn't just leaving her. He was erasing her. He was rewriting their history to cast her as a footnote, a starter wife who had served her purpose. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. Her lawyer gave her a pleading look, but she knew it was no use. Fighting Cameron would be a long, bloody war in the press, and she had no fight left in her. He had all the power, all the connections, all the money. She was just the quiet, unassuming woman he had left behind. She signed her name, the ink a stark black scar on the crisp white paper. Maya Carter. She had insisted on taking back her maiden name, the only piece of her identity she felt she had left. Cameron's smile widened. He stood up, adjusting his cuffs. Excellent. Well, that's that. I wish you all the best, Maya. Truly. He didn't look at her as he walked out of the room. He was already moving on, his mind on his next board meeting, his next gala, his next photograph with his new, vibrant love. He left Maya sitting in the silent, soulless room, the echo of their shattered vows ringing in her ears. As the door clicked shut, a single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, it was a tear of pure, unadulterated rage. He thought he had won. He thought he had reduced her to a settlement and a quiet life. He thought he had erased her. Sitting there staring at her own ghost-like reflection, Maya Carter made a different vow. It was not a vow of love, but of rebirth. He wanted her to disappear into a quiet life. Fine, but she would not be disappearing. She would be gestating. She would rebuild herself, not from the ashes of their marriage, but from the steel he had unknowingly forged within her. And when she re-emerged, she would not be the quiet, sensible woman he had discarded. She would be someone he could never, in his wildest dreams, ignore. The world would see her not as Cameron Frost's ex-wife, but as the architect of her own, far grander empire. The 6 months following the divorce were a blur of calculated silence and relentless work. Maya disappeared from the New York social scene so completely it was as if she had been a figment of everyone's imagination. Her friends' concerned calls eventually dwindled. Her invitations went unanswered. The gossip columns that had feasted on her pain moved on to the next scandal. To the world, and especially to Cameron, Maya Carter had faded into the obscurity he had destined for her. But in a discreet, sun-drenched loft in the meatpacking district, a renaissance was underway. The settlement, which Cameron had considered a generous pittance to keep her quiet, became her seed capital. She didn't spend it on therapy shopping or vengeful luxuries. She invested every penny into the dream she had deferred for a decade, her own firm. She didn't return to traditional architecture. The world had changed, and so had she. She founded Aura Designs, a bespoke firm at the intersection of innovative technology, sustainable architecture, and immersive interior design. It was a concept so forward-thinking that it bordered on science fiction. She worked on creating smart homes that learned their inhabitants' habits, corporate spaces that boosted productivity through biophilic design, and virtual reality blueprints that allowed clients to walk through a building before a single spade of dirt was turned. Her days were grueling 18-hour marathons, fueled by black coffee and an iron will. She assembled a small, brilliant team of young, hungry visionaries who didn't care about her past, only the future she was selling them. She was no longer the soft-spoken woman who moderated her opinions in boardrooms. At the head of her own conference table, her voice was clear, her vision was uncompromising, and her intelligence, once a background support system for Cameron, was now a dazzling, formidable force. The transformation was not just professional. She hired a personal trainer, a former Marine, who worked her until her body, once softened by a comfortable life, became lean and strong. The discipline of the gym was a balm to her fractured spirit. Each pound she lifted felt like she was reclaiming a piece of her own strength. She traded her sensible suits for a wardrobe of sharp, architectural pieces in deep jewel tones and powerful monochromes, custom-made by a young, unknown designer she'd discovered. Her long, mousy hair was cut into a chic, severe bob that framed a face that was now angular and defined. The hollowness in her eyes was replaced by a sharp, focused fire. One rainy afternoon, a pivotal meeting occurred. Through a discreet introduction from her lawyer, she found herself in the private office of Isaac Lennox. The name was legendary in the city. Lennox was an old money titan, a real estate magnate with a reputation for being as ruthless in business as he was fiercely private. He was also, in a twist of cruel irony that was not lost on Maya, Audrey Bell's father. She had hesitated to take the meeting, fearing it was some kind of trap or a further humiliation, but her lawyer had insisted. "He knows who you are," Robert had said, "and he's not a fan of Frost." Isaac Lennox was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've reviewed your business plan for Aura Designs," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's either a work of utter genius or complete folly. I haven't decided which." Maya met his gaze without flinching. For the next hour, she didn't speak of her divorce or Cameron. She spoke of her vision. She laid out her plans for integrated bio-responsive lighting, for urban vertical farms integrated into residential towers, for materials that could sequester carbon from the atmosphere. She spoke with a passion and precision that left no room for doubt. Lennox listened, his steepled fingers covering his mouth, his piercing eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. "You were the brains behind Frost Capital, weren't you?" he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. The early strategy, the portfolio diversification that had your fingerprints all over it. Frost doesn't have that kind of foresight. He's a salesman, a peacock. Maya simply nodded. "My daughter," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, "is a fool. She is drawn to shiny, hollow things, and Cameron Frost is the shiniest, hollowest man I have ever had the displeasure of meeting." He leaned forward, his expression hardening. "He thinks marrying a Bell gives him a direct line to my legacy. He has been trying for months to get me to invest in his new global expansion fund. He thinks he is playing in the big leagues now. He is mistaken." He opened a drawer and pulled out a single file, pushing it across the desk toward her. "This is a preliminary brief for the Hudson Yards Zenith project, a new multi-use skyscraper, the most ambitious architectural project in this city for the next 50 years. My firm is heading the development. Every major architectural firm in the world is bidding for it." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I am giving you a chance to be one of them. I am also creating a private innovation fund. Its first investment will be a controlling stake in Aura Designs. Not because I feel sorry for you, Miss Carter. Pity is a useless emotion. I am doing it because I believe in genius, and I believe in backing a winner. And more than anything, I enjoy watching peacocks get plucked." Maya stared at the file, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just funding. It was a coronation. It was a seat at the most exclusive table in the city. Isaac Lennox was not just giving her a sword, he was giving her an army. "There is one condition," he added, his eyes locking with hers. "For the next few months, we operate in total secrecy. No one knows of my investment. No one knows we have ever met. You will continue to build your portfolio with smaller projects. Then, at the right moment, we will make our announcement. The stage must be perfect. A slow smile spread across Maya's face. The first genuine, joyful smile in over a year. "Mr. Lennox," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I believe I know the perfect stage." Life for Cameron Frost was a meticulously curated performance of success. His penthouse apartment, a monument of white marble and minimalist furniture, offered panoramic views of the city he believed he had conquered. His days were a whirlwind of high-powered lunches, fawning news interviews and board meetings, where his booming voice and confident assertions masked a growing, gnawing anxiety. His new life with Audrey was exactly as he had envisioned it: beautiful, glamorous, and relentlessly public. Their relationship was a brand, managed through carefully staged paparazzi shots and saccharine Instagram posts. Audrey, for her part, played the role of the adoring fiancée to perfection. She was a stunning accessory on his arm, her presence validating his virility and power. She was the vibrancy he had craved. But behind the gilded doors of the penthouse, the vibrancy was often shrill. Audrey was demanding, her mood shifting with the tides of social media engagement. Her conversations revolved around follower counts, brand sponsorships, and the perceived slights of rival influencers. She had no interest in the nuances of his business, only in the lifestyle it provided. She saw Frost Capital not as an entity he had built, but as a personal, bottomless bank account. "Darling, I absolutely need the new season Birkin in crocodile," she'd announced one morning, scrolling through her phone while a personal chef prepared their organic kale smoothies. "It's the color of the season. It's an investment." "Audrey, we need to be a little more prudent right now," Cameron had replied, loosening his tie. "Cash flow is a bit tight with the new fund launching." Her head snapped up, her perfectly sculpted brows furrowing in displeasure. "Tight? What does that even mean? You're Cameron Frost. You don't do tight. Don't be boring, darling. Just buy it." He had bought it, of course. He couldn't afford to look weak, especially not to her. But the truth was, things were becoming strained. Launching the Global Expansion Fund was proving more difficult than he'd anticipated. He'd counted on his engagement to Audrey to open the door to her father's legendary fortune. He had envisioned Isaac Lennox eagerly pouring hundreds of millions into his fund, a symbolic passing of the torch. Instead, he had been met with a wall of impenetrable politeness. His calls to Isaac's office were always taken by a secretary. His requests for a meeting always deferred. Isaac was perpetually overseas or in back-to-back meetings. Cameron had tried to use Audrey as a channel, but she was useless. "Daddy is just Daddy," she'd say with a shrug. "He's always busy. Just send him another gift basket. He likes single malt." Cameron was beginning to suspect that the old man actively disliked him. The thought was infuriating. He was at the top of his game. He was on the cover of Forbes next month. Why couldn't the old dinosaur see that this was a perfect union of legacy and modern dynamism? His frustration with Lennox only amplified his lingering irritation about his divorce. The settlement with Maya, which he thought a masterpiece of swift, ruthless efficiency, now felt like a loose end. He hadn't heard a peep about her. He assumed she had crawled away to some suburban town as he'd intended, but occasionally a stray thought would intrude, a memory of her sharp insight on a difficult merger or her calming presence during a market downturn. He'd quickly squashed these thoughts. She was part of his past, a past he was actively erasing. The upcoming Starlight Foundation Gala was to be the apex of his new life. He had bought an entire table, front and center, for a staggering sum. He would be there with Audrey on his arm, the undisputed king of New York finance. It was the ultimate stage to project the power and stability he desperately needed his investors to see. He had even heard a rumor that Isaac Lennox would be making a rare public appearance to announce a major city project. This was his chance, Cameron thought. He would corner the old man, charm him, and finally secure the investment that would solidify his empire. "What are you wearing to the gala, darling?" he asked Audrey one evening as she posed for a selfie, angling her phone to catch the light from the sunset. Obviously the custom Valdrin Sahiti gown, the one that's practically dripping in crystals, she said, not looking away from her screen. "They're doing a whole feature on my look for Vogue online. The headline is, 'The New Queen of New York Society.'" "Perfect," Cameron said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "We'll be the talk of the town." He looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle below. He felt a surge of triumph. Everything was falling into place. He had the beautiful fiancée, the high-profile career, the respect of his peers. He had shed his old, boring life and emerged as a titan. He was untouchable. He never once thought about Maya. She was a ghost, a forgotten chapter in a book he had long since closed. He couldn't imagine a world where her quiet, sensible existence could ever intersect with his dazzling, high-stakes reality again. The thought was so absurd, it wasn't even a possibility. The gala would be his coronation. There was simply no other possible outcome. The grand ballroom of the plaza was a breathtaking sea of opulence and power. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a diamond-like shimmer over the city's elite. The air hummed with the murmur of discreet gossip, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the ambient strains of a live string quartet. This was the Starlight Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of New York's social calendar, where fortunes were pledged and reputations were cemented. Cameron Frost and Audrey Bell made their entrance precisely at the peak of the arrivals, a move calculated for maximum impact. A tidal wave of camera flashes erupted from the press line, the staccato clicking creating a sound like a hailstorm. Cameron, cloaked in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, radiated smug confidence. He placed a proprietary hand on the small of Audrey's back, guiding her through the gauntlet of photographers. Audrey was a vision in her crystal-encrusted gown. The dress was a spectacle of silver and light, so heavily beaded it seemed to be woven from starlight itself. It was daring, with a plunging neckline and a thigh-high slit designed to command attention and scream wealth. She posed and preened, offering the cameras her practiced smile, her every movement a performance for her legion of online followers. "Cameron! Audrey! Over here!" the photographers yelled. "The new power couple!" They were the center of the universe, and they reveled in it. Inside the ballroom, they were immediately swarmed by sycophants and business associates. Cameron accepted congratulations on his upcoming Forbes cover, while Audrey air-kissed her way through a circle of fellow socialites, comparing the carat size of their various gems. "Isn't she just breathtaking?" Cameron boomed to a rival hedge fund manager, gesturing toward Audrey. "The most beautiful woman in the room." "Absolutely, Cameron. You've certainly upgraded," the man replied with a knowing smirk. The jab at his past was not lost on Cameron. It was exactly the narrative he wanted. He had shed the old, the dowdy, the unremarkable for the new, the brilliant, the envied. He felt invincible. They took their seats at their prime table, a triumphant island in the center of the room. The evening was unfolding exactly as he had planned. He scanned the room for Isaac Lennox but didn't see him yet. No matter. The night was young. About 30 minutes later, as the first course was being served, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere of the room. It started near the grand entrance, a sudden hush that spread like a ripple in a pond. The frenetic energy of the photographers outside, which had died down to a low buzz, suddenly flared with an intensity that surpassed even Cameron and Audrey's arrival. The flashes were so rapid and sustained that they pulsed through the ballroom doors like a lightning storm. A few heads turned, then a few more. A murmur went through the crowd. "Who is that?" someone whispered at a nearby table. Cameron craned his neck, annoyed by the distraction. Audrey was busy taking a video of her champagne glass for her Instagram story. "Probably some politician," he muttered. And then she walked in. The woman who entered the ballroom did not seem to merely walk. She seemed to flow. She moved with a serene, deliberate grace that instantly commanded the attention of every person in the room. The string quartet seemed to falter for a beat. Conversations died mid-sentence. She was wearing a gown of deep sapphire velvet, a color so rich and profound it seemed to absorb the light around it. The dress was a masterpiece of understated elegance and architectural design. It was not revealing, yet it clung to a silhouette that was toned, powerful, and unapologetically feminine. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a dramatic floor-sweeping cape that billowed softly behind her. Around her neck was a single breathtaking piece of jewelry, a necklace of cascading white diamonds that looked like frozen starlight against the dark velvet. Her hair was a sleek raven-black bob that gleamed under the chandeliers. Her face, which so many in the room vaguely recalled as being pleasant but forgettable, was now a study in sculpted elegance. Her cheekbones were sharp, her jawline defined, and her lips were painted a bold, confident crimson. But it was her eyes that held everyone captive. They were dark, intelligent, and held a calm, unshakable confidence. There was no trace of the broken, pale woman from the lawyer's office. This was not a ghost. This was a queen. It was Maya Carter. For a full 10 seconds, the room was suspended in a state of collective shock. People who had known her for years stared, their minds struggling to reconcile the woman they were seeing with the one they remembered. At his table, Cameron Frost froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly pale. The smug smile was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated disbelief. It was as if he had seen a spectre, but a spectre more vibrant and alive than anyone else in the room. Audrey finally looked up from her phone, annoyed by the sudden silence. "What is every—" Her voice trailed off as she followed Cameron's gaze. She saw Maya, her perfectly made-up face, contorted into a mask of confusion, which quickly curdled into jealous rage. Her own glittering, look-at-me dress suddenly felt cheap and gaudy next to the profound, regal elegance of Maya's gown. The cameras outside were exploding, but the real explosion was the silent, seismic shockwave that tore through the ballroom. Cameron Frost had paraded his new love, expecting to be crowned king. He never anticipated that the queen he had banished would choose this very night to return and reclaim her kingdom. And as Maya took her first step into the room, her gaze coolly sweeping over the stunned crowd, it was clear she wasn't just here to attend a gala. She was here to make a statement, and the entire city was her audience. Maya did not pause at the door to drink in the reaction she had caused. That would have been the action of someone seeking approval. Instead, she moved with the quiet assurance of someone who owned the room before she even entered it. Her destination was a discreet yet strategically important table near the dais, where several of the city's most influential and older power brokers were seated. They were not the flashy hedge fund managers Cameron courted, but the quiet titans of industry and real estate who could build or break a man with a single phone call. As she passed tables, the whispers followed her like the train of her gown. "Is that Maya? What happened to her? She looks incredible. My God, that necklace must be worth a fortune." Cameron watched, paralyzed as she navigated the room. He felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him, sensing their pity, their curiosity, their schadenfreude. This was not how the night was supposed to go. She was supposed to be a sad story, a forgotten memory. Instead, she had become the main event. "Who does she think she is?" Audrey hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. Her fingers were clenched so tightly around her jeweled clutch that her knuckles were white. "Look at her. It's pathetic. She's trying to get your attention, Cameron. It's just so desperate." But even as she said the words, Audrey knew they were false. There was nothing desperate about Maya. She hadn't even glanced in their direction. It was a dismissal more profound than any confrontation. It was the dismissal of a queen to a court jester. Maya reached her table and was greeted with a warmth and respect that stunned the onlookers. A distinguished silver-haired man stood to pull out her chair. Another, the head of a massive construction conglomerate, leaned in to kiss her cheek. These were men Cameron had been trying to get meetings with for years, and they were treating Maya not as a socialite, but as a peer. The final devastating blow to Cameron's carefully constructed reality came in the form of a man who had just entered the ballroom through a private side entrance, deliberately avoiding the press. Isaac Lennox, looking imposing and powerful in a classic tuxedo, strode directly to Maya's table. Audrey saw him first. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, a triumphant look flashing across her face. She stood up, expecting him to come to their table, to finally give Cameron the public acknowledgement he craved. But Isaac Lennox did not look at his daughter. His gaze was fixed on Maya. He reached her table, bent down, and kissed her warmly on both cheeks. "Maya, my dear, you look magnificent." His deep voice boomed, carrying across the now silent nearby tables. "I trust your journey was pleasant." "Perfectly pleasant, Isaac." "Thank you," Maya replied, her voice calm and clear. The sight was so shocking, so utterly incomprehensible, that a collective gasp went through their section of the ballroom. Isaac Lennox, the reclusive patriarch, the man everyone was here to see, was fawning over Cameron Frost's cast-off ex-wife. Audrey stood frozen, her hand half raised in a wave, her face a picture of pure humiliation. Her own father was ignoring her in favor of the woman she had replaced. Cameron felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. He felt the narrative of the night, of his life, slipping violently from his grasp. He had to regain control. Pushing back his chair, he stood up and began to walk towards Maya's table, his stride a forced imitation of his usual confidence. He reached the table just as Isaac Lennox was taking his seat beside Maya. "Isaac," Cameron said, his voice a little too loud. "Good to see you. I was hoping we'd have a chance to connect tonight." He then turned his attention to Maya, forcing a condescendingly gentle smile. "Maya, what a surprise. You look well. It's good to see you getting out." His tone was meant to be patronizing, to re-establish the old dynamic, to remind everyone that she was the little woman he had set aside. Maya looked up at him. There was no pain in her eyes, no anger, not even recognition of their shared past. There was only a cool, polite indifference. It was the look one might give to a slightly incompetent waiter. Before she could speak, Isaac Lennox answered for her. He looked up at Cameron, his stormy eyes filled with a chillingly placid contempt. "Frost," he said, the name sounding like an insult. "I don't believe we have anything to discuss." He then gestured toward Maya. "But you should know who you're speaking to. This is Maya Carter, the president and CEO of Aura Designs." He paused, letting the title sink in. "She is also my new primary partner and the lead architect for the Hudson Yards Zenith project, which I am announcing tonight." The words hit the air with the force of a physical blow. Aura Designs, Zenith project, lead architect. Cameron stared, his mind reeling. It was impossible. She was an architect, yes, but she had given that up. She was nobody. "I'm sorry," Cameron stammered, a frantic, disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. There must be some mistake. Maya runs a small, boutique firm. Isaac Lennox's smile was arctic. There is no mistake. My fund has acquired a 60% stake in her boutique firm. We are investing 9 figures into its expansion. Maya's vision is the future of urban development. She is a genius. And unlike some people, he added, his eyes flicking meaningfully toward Cameron, she possesses integrity, loyalty, and true substance. The public humiliation was absolute. Isaac Lennox hadn't just endorsed Maya, he had anointed her. And in the same breath, he had utterly, devastatingly annihilated Cameron in front of the very people he had spent his entire career trying to impress. Cameron stood there, speechless, as Maya finally met his gaze and gave him a small, pitying smile. It was the smile of a victor who had won the war before the first battle had even begun. The rest of the evening unfolded like a slow-motion car crash for Cameron Frost. The news of Isaac Lennox's announcement spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Whispers turned into excited murmurs. Financial reporters, sensing a major story, began furiously typing on their phones, their focus shifting entirely from the gala's charity aspect to the bombshell business revelation. The Zenith project was the biggest development deal in a generation, and it had been handed to a relative unknown, a woman who, until an hour ago, was famous only for being Cameron Frost's jilted ex-wife. Suddenly, Maya's table was the center of power in the room. A procession of the city's most influential figures made their way over to offer their congratulations. They spoke to her with a deference and respect that Cameron had always believed was reserved for men like himself. He watched, rooted to the spot in the aisle, as she accepted their praise with the same serene grace with which she had entered. She was not gloating. She was simply inhabiting a role that was rightfully hers. Humiliation gave way to a desperate, clawing panic in Cameron's chest. He stumbled back to his table, where Audrey was in the middle of a hushed, furious phone call. "What do you mean his card was declined?" she hissed into her phone. "Try it again. It's a black card. It doesn't have a limit." She slammed the phone down, her face pale with fury and embarrassment. Her personal shopper, on a mission to secure a rare couture bag being sold at the gala's auction, had just been publicly rebuffed. "Cameron, what is going on?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "Why is your card being declined? And why is my father treating that nobody like she's the Queen of England?" Cameron sank into his chair, his mind racing. It didn't make sense. Cash flow was tight, but his credit was impeccable. Unless... His phone buzzed. It was a text from his COO. "Need to talk. Urgent. We have a major problem." Another buzz. An alert from a financial news service. The headline made his blood run cold. Isaac Lennox divests from Frost Capital. Cites lack of confidence in leadership. A third buzz. An email from the board of directors of his largest corporate client. Subject: emergency review of our account. The dominoes were not just falling. They were being bulldozed. Isaac Lennox had not just backed Maya. He had systematically and secretly dismantled the foundations of Cameron's own empire. His investment in Maya was the flourish, but the real work had been done in the shadows. Lennox had been poisoning the well for months, quietly pulling his own money and influencing his network to do the same. Cameron's global expansion fund, the venture he had staked his entire reputation on, was built on a house of cards, and Lennox had just pulled out the bottom one. He looked across the room at Isaac Lennox, who caught his eye and gave him a slow, deliberate nod, a final acknowledgement of his complete and utter ruin. The old man had played him from the very beginning. His rejection of Cameron wasn't just personal disdain. It was a calculated long-term strategy of destruction, and the catalyst, the reason for it all, was now sitting beside him, looking radiant. The facade of Cameron and Audrey's perfect life crumbled in an instant. The power they projected was based entirely on Cameron's perceived success. With that gone, there was nothing left. "My father," Audrey whispered, the horrifying realization dawning on her. He did this to ruin you, and he used her to do it." Her fury at Maya was now dwarfed by her terror of her father's wrath and the sudden, shocking loss of her lifestyle. The glamorous life she had signed up for was evaporating before her eyes. She looked at Cameron, but she no longer saw a titan of industry. She saw a failure, a man who had been outmaneuvered and publicly castrated, a sinking ship. Without another word, Audrey Bell stood up. She smoothed down her crystal-covered dress, lifted her chin, and walked away from the table. She didn't look back at Cameron. She walked straight out of the ballroom, her exit as dramatic as her entrance, leaving him alone amidst the wreckage of his life at a table paid for, with money he no longer had. Cameron sat there, a hollow man in a perfect tuxedo. The murmur of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, the music, it all faded into a dull roar in his ears. He was no longer the king of the gala. He was a cautionary tale, a public spectacle of hubris and downfall. He finally looked at Maya again. She was in conversation with a famous architect, her face animated, her eyes sparkling with intelligence and passion. She looked vibrant. She looked fulfilled. She was everything he had told her he needed, everything he had claimed she was not. And he had thrown it all away for something as fleeting and superficial as a glittering dress and a pretty face. In that moment, he understood the devastating truth. Maya hadn't returned for revenge. Revenge was beneath her. She had simply moved on and built a better world for herself, a world so far beyond his own that he could no longer even reach it. Her success was not the weapon that destroyed him. His own character, his own arrogance and cruelty had been the cause of his downfall. Her triumph was merely the light that illuminated his ruin. The morning sun broke over Manhattan, glinting off 1,000,000 windows. But the real light, the one generating all the heat, was emanating from the city's screens. By 6 a.m., the story of the Starlight Foundation Gala was no longer a piece of society gossip. It was a financial and cultural earthquake. Maya Carter was on the landing page of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Bloomberg. Cable news channels had scrapped their planned segments to run specials on the dramatic corporate coup, with breathless pundits analyzing every angle. The headlines were a barrage of sensational, triumphant prose. The Phoenix of Park Avenue, how Maya Carter built a new empire from the ashes of betrayal. Frost Capital crumbles as ex-wife. Soars with Lennox's backing. The ultimate revenge, the woman Cameron Frost erased, just remade, the Manhattan skyline. They plastered her gala photo everywhere. That serene, powerful image in the sapphire velvet gown, a modern monarch in a sea of stunned onlookers. They juxtaposed it with old photos of her, standing slightly behind Cameron, her smile gentle and unassuming, the visual narrative of her transformation stark and undeniable. But for Maya, the news was just background noise, a distant storm she had already weathered. She wasn't at home, curled up with a laptop absorbing the praise or gloating over the articles. Vengeance felt like a hollow meal, and she was already hungry for the future. She was at her office, the sprawling, sun-drenched loft that served as the headquarters and heart of Aura Designs. She had been there since 5 a.m., long before the first headlines had even hit the internet. Dressed not in a velvet gown, but in impeccably tailored black trousers and a simple cream silk blouse, She was already in her element. She stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, a simple ceramic mug of black coffee warming her hands, looking out over the cityscape she was about to irrevocably change. The office behind her was already buzzing with a new, electric energy. Her team, a tight-knit group of 20 brilliant minds she had handpicked, was moving with a renewed sense of purpose. The Zenith Project, once a confidential dream, was now a public mandate. The air crackled with excitement, ambition, and the thrill of validation. In the lobby, a television was on, and a sharp-suited analyst was speaking animatedly. "What we witnessed last night was more than a corporate shake-up," the analyst said, gesturing emphatically. "It was a masterclass in strategy, executed with the precision of a surgeon. Isaac Lennox didn't just invest in a new company. He orchestrated the complete immolation of an old one. Cameron Frost built his house on arrogance and public perception. And Maya Carter, the woman he foolishly underestimated, just proved that a foundation of substance, vision, and integrity is the only one that lasts." A small, wry smile touched Maya's lips before she turned away. Miles away, in a penthouse that now felt like a mausoleum, Cameron Frost was living the other side of that news report. The panoramic views of the city were no longer a symbol of his dominion, but a mocking testament to his public disgrace. His phone, once a conduit for fawning calls and lucrative offers, was now a harbinger of doom. It hadn't stopped ringing, each call a fresh nail in his coffin. "The board is invoking the character and fitness clause, Cameron," his lawyer had screamed through the phone an hour ago. "They want you out by noon." "Your credit lines have been frozen," his CFO had informed him in a clipped, deadpan voice. "The margin calls are catastrophic. We're insolvent." He had tried to call Audrey, a pathetic, reflexive act, only to find his number was blocked. Her social media was already wiped clean of his existence. He was a ghost in a life he had thought he'd built to last forever. He wandered through the vast, white marble rooms, the minimalist furniture now feeling hostile and alien. He saw the ghosts of his own hubris everywhere. The plinth where an expensive sculpture had been repossessed that morning, the empty space in the wine cellar where his most prized vintages used to be. He slumped onto a sterile white sofa, the one Audrey had insisted on, and stared at his reflection in the dark television screen. He saw a man utterly broken, a hollow shell in a Tom Ford suit from the night before. The world had crowned him a king, and he had believed it. He had discarded his queen, his partner, his strategist for a bauble, and in doing so had given her the very motivation she needed to build her own, far greater kingdom. The analyst on the television was right. His foundation had been nothing but air, and it had taken only one gust of real power to blow it all away. Back at the Aura Designs loft, the atmosphere was one of controlled, joyous chaos. Phones rang incessantly with offers of partnerships, interview requests, and lucrative client proposals. Maya moved through it all with a preternatural calm, a steady hand on the rudder of a ship that had just caught a gale-force wind. "The concrete supplier for the Burj Khalifa is on line 3. They want to bid for the foundation," her assistant announced, eyes wide with awe. "Get their preliminary numbers," Maya instructed, "and cross-reference them with the new sustainable composites we were testing. I want a full environmental impact report on every material we consider." Her lead engineer, a brilliant young woman named Lena, approached her, holding a tablet displaying a complex rendering. "Maya, we're hitting a potential resonance issue with the spire design at peak wind shear. The simulations are problematic." Maya took the tablet, her eyes scanning the complex data. For a moment, she was completely absorbed, the noise of the office fading away. She saw the problem not as a setback, but as a puzzle. Her mind, the same mind that had once balanced Cameron's portfolios and planned his corporate takeovers, now danced with physics and aesthetics. "It's the harmonics," she said after a moment. "We're trying to brute force the dampening. It's inelegant." She sketched a new shape on the screen with her finger. "What if we alter the cross-section? Make it asymmetrical, like a bird's wing. Let it slice the wind instead of fighting it. Run the simulation again with a biomimetic profile." Lena stared at the screen, then at Maya, her expression one of pure admiration. "Of course, that's genius." As Lena hurried away, Maya's assistant approached again, this time holding a simple, elegant bouquet of white tulips. These just arrived, from the original 5. The original 5 were the first employees she had hired, the ones who had taken a chance on her when Aura Designs was just a concept and a business plan. She took the small card. The message was simple. We always knew. Now the world does too. A genuine warmth spread through her chest, a feeling more profound and satisfying than any headline. This was real, this loyalty, this shared creation. This was the empire that mattered. Her private line buzzed. The display read, "I, Lennox." She retreated to the quiet of her personal office and answered. "I assume you've seen the papers?" Isaac rumbled, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. "I've seen the headlines," Maya replied, sinking into her chair and gazing out the window. "I haven't had time for the details. We're already storyboarding the primary structural concepts for the Zenith Tower." A dry chuckle came down the line. "Of course you are, always looking forward. That's why I backed you. I hope last night provided a satisfactory conclusion to your previous chapter." Maya paused, her gaze fixed on a distant skyscraper, one Cameron had once pointed to as a symbol of his ambition. She remembered the cold finality in the lawyer's office, the feeling of being erased. She had carried that feeling like a shard of ice in her heart for months. But now, it was gone. "Last night wasn't about a conclusion, Isaac. It was about a beginning," she said, the truth of it solidifying as she spoke. "It was never really about Cameron. Not the real work, anyway. Maybe at first, the anger was the fuel, but the fire was always my own. The desire to build, to create something meaningful. That's what drove me through the 18-hour days." She could feel Lennox's smile through the phone. A fine distinction. He was merely the catalyst then, the fool who inadvertently freed the genius from the bottle. He sighed, a sound heavy with a rare paternal warmth. He destroyed himself, Isaac. His vanity, his cruelty. They were structural weaknesses. The market, the world, it just exposed them. I just opened the door. He was the one who walked through it. "Indeed," Lennox said. "Well, the future is yours, Maya. Go build it, and send me the revised Spire simulations when you have them." He hung up. Maya leaned back, the silence of her office a comforting embrace. She thought of the woman she had been, a quiet partner who had willingly dimmed her own light so that his could shine brighter. She had believed that was love. She realized now that love, real love, doesn't require sacrifice. It requires partnership. It doesn't demand one person shrink, but that both grow. Cameron had never seen her. He had seen a reflection of his own needs, a helpmate, a manager, a hostess. The moment his needs changed, she became disposable. The greatest irony was that her true self, the brilliant creator and formidable leader, was everything he claimed to admire. He had been blind to the treasure in his own house. Her victory wasn't in his ruin. His ruin was just a sad, inevitable outcome of his own choices. Her victory was in this moment, sitting in this office, surrounded by a team that respected her, with a project in front of her that would challenge every fiber of her being. Her victory was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be, a queen in her own castle, built not of stone and steel, but of intelligence, resilience, and an unbreakable will. She stood up and walked back out into the main office. She went to the grand conference table where the blueprints for the Zenith project were laid out like a map to a new world. She picked up a pencil, the familiar weight of it a comfort, and leaned over the plans, her mind already consumed with load-bearing walls, sustainable energy systems, and the aesthetics of the spire. Her reign was just beginning. And that's the incredible story of Maya Carter. A testament to the fact that the most powerful form of revenge is not destruction, but creation. She didn't stoop to her ex-husband's level. She built a new one for herself, so high he couldn't even reach it. Her story reminds us that our value is never determined by who leaves us, but by what we choose to build in their absence. It's a powerful lesson in turning pain into power and transforming personal heartbreak into a public triumph, not for the approval of others, but for the fulfillment of our own potential. What did you think of Maya's epic comeback? Could you feel the tension in that ballroom? Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of incredible transformations and inspiring vindication. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening. What happens when the life you meticulously built to prove you'd won crumbles in a single evening? Reed Carr thought he had it all: a thriving career, a beautiful young fiancée on his arm, and the smug satisfaction of leaving his ordinary ex-wife in the dust. He brought his new life to a friend's wedding, ready to flaunt his success. But he walked into a reality he could never have imagined. The woman he'd cast aside as not being good enough was there, radiant and transformed. And the man by her side wasn't just a new husband. He was Julian Rhodes, a name whispered with reverence in circles of unimaginable wealth and power. This isn't just a story of an awkward encounter. It's a story about the deafening echo of past choices and the brutal revelation that the game you thought you were winning had a different, much richer player all along. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden fingers across the rolling hills of Napa Valley. It was the kind of impossibly perfect day that felt scripted, a backdrop worthy of the exorbitant price tag Reed knew his friends, Oliver and Jessica, had paid for their wedding venue. The air at the Sterling Peak vineyard was thick with the scent of ripening grapes and expensive perfume. Reed Carr adjusted the knot of his silk tie, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. Beside him, Brittany smoothed down her form-fitting champagne-colored dress, her diamond engagement ring catching the light and scattering tiny rainbows across the cobblestone path. "Isn't this just divine, darling?" Brittany whispered, her voice a practiced melody of social grace. "Jessica has such exquisite taste. I'm already taking notes for our big day." Reed squeezed her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. "Only the best for you, of course. But let's be honest, our wedding will make this look like a quaint little get-together." It was a boast, and they both knew it. But it was the currency their relationship was built on: aspirational, competitive, and relentlessly public. At 38, Reed had curated his life with the precision of a master artist. He was a senior VP at a rapidly growing financial tech firm, drove a slate-grey Porsche, and lived in a minimalist penthouse overlooking the city. Brittany, a decade his junior and a popular lifestyle influencer, was the final, perfect brushstroke on his canvas of success. She was beautiful, vivacious, and just as invested in appearances as he was. She was everything, he often reminded himself, that his ex-wife, Emily, was not. The thought of Emily was a fleeting, sepia-toned memory. She was from a different chapter of his life, a chapter he had decisively closed 5 years ago. Emily was quiet, academic, content with simple things, a walk in the park, a night in with a classic film, a well-loved paperback. In his 20s, he'd mistaken her quiet strength for a lack of ambition. As his own career began to ascend, he grew to see her contentment as a weight, an anchor holding him to a life of mediocrity. The divorce had been his idea, a clean, sharp break he'd framed as a necessary step in his evolution. He had to shed his old skin to grow. Emily, he'd reasoned, was that old skin. He hadn't seen or heard from her since the papers were signed. He'd heard through the grapevine she'd moved away from the city, back to some small, forgettable town. He pictured her in a small house, maybe working at a local library or a community college, living the same simple, unambitious life she'd always craved. The thought didn't bring him guilt, but a faint, condescending pity. It reinforced his belief that he'd made the right choice. He'd escaped. "Reed, Brittany, you made it!" Oliver, the groom, clapped Reed on the back, his face flushed with champagne and happiness. "Glad you could find the place. Get a drink, mingle. We're about to get this show on the road." They navigated the manicured lawn, collecting flutes of champagne from a passing waiter. The crowd was a predictable mix of college friends and business associates. Reed was in his element, exchanging handshakes and air kisses, making effortless small talk about market trends and vacation spots. Brittany was a natural extension of him, laughing at the right moments, her eyes sparkling, a perfect advertisement for the life he provided. "Did you see the guest list?" Brittany murmured, leaning in close. "I heard Julian Rhodes is here. The Julian Rhodes. Can you imagine?" Reed's brow furrowed. Julian Rhodes was a titan, a semi-reclusive tech visionary who had sold his AI software company for a sum that was spoken of in mythological terms. He was a ghost, a name on the cover of business magazines, not someone who showed up at the weddings of normal people like Oliver and Jessica. "No way," Reed scoffed. "Oliver knows people, but he doesn't know people on that level. It's just a rumor." "Well, keep your eyes peeled," Brittany said, her gaze already scanning the crowd with a predator's focus. An introduction could be life-changing. The gentle chime of a bell called the guests to their seats for the ceremony. They found their assigned places in the third row, the white chairs arranged in a gentle curve, facing an archway draped in white roses and eucalyptus. Reed settled into his seat, feeling a familiar sense of pride. This was his world now. These were his people. He had earned his place here. As the string quartet began to play a soft, elegant prelude, a couple moved to take their seats in the front row, their backs to him. The man was tall, with distinguished silver at his temples, and a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed to have been woven onto his frame. The woman beside him wore a deep emerald green dress, a simple, elegant column of silk that clung to her figure in a way that was both modest and breathtaking. Her dark hair was swept up in a graceful chignon, exposing the delicate line of her neck and a pair of stunning, understated diamond earrings. There was something about her posture, a quiet confidence in the set of her shoulders that snagged Reed's attention. It was familiar, yet completely alien. The woman turned slightly to murmur something to her companion, and the afternoon sun caught her profile. Reed's breath hitched in his throat. The champagne flute in his hand felt suddenly slick and heavy. The air, just moments ago filled with the sweet scent of roses, now seemed thin and unbreathable. his carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. It couldn't be, but it was. It was Emily. She looked different, profoundly different. The quiet, bookish woman he remembered was gone. In her place was a woman of poise and elegance, a woman who looked as if she belonged in the front row of this opulent ceremony as effortlessly as she breathed. The 5 years that had passed hadn't aged her. They had refined her, carving away her youthful uncertainty and leaving behind a stunning, self-possessed grace. Reed's mind raced, trying to process the impossibility. What was she doing here? And who was the man beside her? An old friend? A new boyfriend? He felt a strange, unwelcome prickle of possessiveness. He watched as the man leaned in, his hand resting gently on the small of her back, a gesture of easy intimacy that sent a jolt of pure, irrational anger through Reed. Brittany, oblivious, leaned over. "See? I told you. That's him. That's Julian Rhodes. Who is he with? She's beautiful, but I don't recognize her at all." The name hit Reed with the force of a physical blow. Julian Rhodes. He stared at the man's back, at the quiet authority he projected, even when seated, at the way Emily leaned into him, a small, trusting smile on her face. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, deafening clang. The ceremony began. The bride walked down the aisle. Vows were exchanged, but Reed saw none of it. His entire focus was locked on the woman in the emerald dress, his ex-wife, the simple, unambitious woman he had discarded, sitting in the front row with a billionaire. And on her left hand, catching the sun with a fire that dwarfed Brittany's diamond, was a ring. A wedding ring. The world swam back into focus with the sound of applause. Oliver and Jessica were walking back up the aisle, beaming as guests showered them with rose petals. Reed stood mechanically, clapping along with everyone else, but his eyes were fixed on the front row. Emily and Julian Rhodes were standing now, and as they turned, Reed got a full, unobstructed view. Emily's eyes, the same warm, intelligent eyes he remembered, swept over the crowd. For a heart-stopping second, they met his. There was no shock in them, no anger, no flicker of surprise, just a brief, cool acknowledgement, as if he were a distant acquaintance she barely recalled. Then her gaze moved on, settling on Julian with a warmth and affection that made Reed's stomach clench. It was the look she used to give him. "Let's go to the cocktail hour," Brittany said, tugging at his arm, her voice buzzing with excitement. "I absolutely have to meet them." "No," Reed said, the word coming out sharper than he intended. Brittany looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean, no?" Reed. "This is Julian Rhodes. This is a networking opportunity from the gods." "We'll see," he muttered, trying to regain control. His mind was a chaotic storm of questions. How? When? Why hadn't anyone told him? He had mutual friends with Emily, people who were at this very wedding. Had they all known? Was he the last to find out, the subject of some grand cosmic joke? He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see Robert, a friend from his college days and one of the groomsmen. "Reed, man, good to see you," Robert said, his smile a little too tight. "Crazy, right?" "Crazy what?" Reed asked, playing dumb, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Robert gestured vaguely towards the front row. Emily, looking like $1 million. Or, well, a few billion bucks, I guess. He chuckled nervously. Who would have thought? The casual confirmation sent another wave of disbelief through Reed. "You knew?" "Well, yeah, man. We all knew. She and Julian have been together for about 3 years, married for the last year. He's a great guy, totally devoted to her." Robert seemed to sense Reed's shock. "Look, I figured you knew. I didn't want to be the one to, He didn't know. He had been so wrapped up in his own curated success story, so certain of Emily's quiet, unremarkable future, that the possibility of this reality had never even entered his mind. He had been a fool. The crowd moved towards the grand terrace overlooking the vineyards for cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Reed followed, feeling like a man walking to his own execution. Brittany, sensing a story but not its protagonist, was relentless. "So you do know her?" she pressed, her voice a mix of curiosity and accusation. "The woman with Julian Rhodes? You looked like you saw a ghost." Reed took a long sip of his champagne, the bubbles doing nothing to calm his nerves. "She's my ex-wife." Brittany stopped dead in her tracks. Her perfectly made-up face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a sharp, calculating anger. Your ex-wife, the one you said was a librarian from a small town?" Her voice was a low, dangerous hiss. "I thought she was," he said lamely. "I hadn't heard anything." "So, the simple, unambitious woman you left so you could build a real life is now married to one of the richest men in the world." The sarcasm in her voice was a razor blade. "You have got to be kidding me." Before Reed could formulate a defense, the moment he had been dreading arrived. Oliver and Jessica were making their rounds, and they were walking directly towards them, with Emily and Julian in tow. There was no escape. "Reed, Brittany, so glad you're here," Jessica said, her bridal glow undiminished. "I'm not sure if you two have met our dear friends, Julian and Emily." Reed's throat went dry. He was face to face with her now. Up close, she was even more striking. The simple dress was clearly couture, the material impossibly fine. Her skin glowed with health and happiness. She looked serene, untroubled, and completely out of his league. "Emily," he managed, his voice sounding strangled to his own ears. "It's been a long time." "Reed," she replied, her tone polite and even. There was no lingering bitterness, which was somehow more insulting than if she had slapped him. She gave him a small, closed-mouth smile. "You remember my ex-husband, Reed Carr, darling," she said, turning to Julian. Julian Rhodes extended a hand. His handshake was firm, his eyes a piercing shade of blue that seemed to see right through Reed's facade. He wasn't classically handsome in the way a movie star was, but he possessed an aura of quiet, unshakable power that was far more intimidating. "A pleasure to meet you," Julian said, his voice a calm, deep baritone. There was no hint of animosity or triumph in his tone. He was simply stating a fact. "And this must be your fiancé," Emily said, her gaze shifting to Brittany. Her eyes took in the expensive dress, the large ring, the tense posture with a neutral, almost analytical calm. "Brittany, is it? Jessica has told me so much about your blog. It sounds fascinating." The comment was perfectly polite, yet it landed like a subtle jab. To Emily, married to a man who shaped global technology, a lifestyle blog must have seemed like a child's hobby. Brittany, to her credit, recovered quickly, plastering on her influencer smile. "Emily, it's an honor. And Mr. Rhodes, I'm a huge admirer of your work." "Please call me Julian," he said, his attention already returning to his wife. He placed a hand on her back again, the proprietary gesture a clear, unspoken statement. The conversation was a masterpiece of social awkwardness. Reed felt like an insect under a microscope. Every word he said sounded foolish. Every glance he stole at Emily felt like a confession of his own monumental error in judgment. He tried to talk about his work, but the words financial tech turned to ash in his mouth when speaking to a man who had practically invented the future. He watched the way Julian looked at Emily, with a mixture of adoration and profound respect. He would listen intently when she spoke, his head tilted slightly, as if her words were the only thing that mattered in the world. Reed had never looked at her that way. He had listened to her, sure, but always with half an ear, already thinking about his next meeting, his next goal, his next rung on the ladder. He had seen her as a supporting character in his story. He realized now, with sickening clarity, that he had been nothing but a prologue in hers. The group was mercifully broken up by another guest, pulling Julian away to ask about a charitable foundation he ran. As he excused himself, he gave Emily's hand a gentle squeeze. "I'll be right back, my love." My love. The words echoed in Reed's skull. For a brief, terrible moment, he was alone with Emily and Brittany. The air crackled with unspoken history. "You look well, Emily," Reed said, the platitude feeling hollow and stupid. "I am well, Reed." "Thank you," she replied. "Napa suits you." It was a dismissal, a polite closing of the door. She then turned her full attention to Brittany. "It was lovely to meet you, Brittany. I hope you both enjoy the evening." And with that, she turned and walked away, moving through the crowd with an effortless grace to rejoin her husband, leaving Reed and Brittany standing in the wreckage of their perfect afternoon. Brittany's eyes were like chips of ice. "A librarian?" She seethed under her breath, her voice trembling with fury. "You told me you left a librarian." The rest of the cocktail hour was a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversations. Reed felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on him. He wasn't just Reed Carr, Senior VP, anymore. He was now the ex-husband, a walking, talking historical artifact from Emily Rhodes's previous, lesser life. The whispers were subtle at first, a shift in tone when he approached a group, a quick glance exchanged between old friends. But he could feel them, like a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. He and Brittany stood near the edge of the terrace, a gulf of silence between them. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and violet. But the beauty of the scene was lost on Reed. His mind was replaying the last decade, but this time the footage was corrupted. The narrative he had so carefully constructed of his bold escape from a life of suffocating mediocrity was dissolving into a pathetic tale of a man who'd mistaken a diamond for a common stone and thrown it away. He overheard a fragment of conversation from a nearby group that included some of Jessica's bridesmaids. "Can you even imagine he left her?" one woman said, her voice dripping with incredulity. "I heard he told people she had no drive. Look at her now. She's on the board of 3 non-profits, and Julian says she has the sharpest mind for philanthropic investment he's ever seen." "He's with that influencer girl, right?" another chimed in. "The one who posts pictures of her avocado toast. It's like trading in a classic Rolls-Royce for a rented scooter." The women shared a laugh, oblivious or indifferent to the fact that Reed was standing 10 feet away. The comparison hit him like a physical blow. A rented scooter. He looked at Brittany, who was furiously typing on her phone, probably composing a passive-aggressive social media post. Her beauty, which had once been his proudest acquisition, now seemed shallow, one-dimensional. Her ambition, which he'd seen as a match for his own, now felt like a desperate scramble for validation through likes and shares. He needed a stronger drink. Excusing himself, he made his way to the bar, his path taking him past a table where Julian and Emily were seated with an older couple. Emily was laughing, a genuine, uninhibited laugh that he hadn't heard in years. It was a sound he once thought he owned, a sound he had muted with his constant pressure, his subtle criticisms, his overarching belief that her contentment was a flaw. Julian was watching her, not with the blind adoration of a besotted fool, but with the deep, appreciative gaze of a man who understood her true worth. Reed saw it then. Julian hadn't just given Emily a life of luxury. He had given her the space to become the person she was always meant to be. The confidence, the poise, the elegance. It wasn't bought with Rhodes's money. It had been inside her all along, and Reed had been too blind and too arrogant to see it. He remembered their arguments in the final year of their marriage. "Why can't you just be happy with what we have, Reed?" she had asked him once, her voice laced with a weary sadness. They were in their small apartment, the one he'd despised for its lack of a view. "We have a good life." "This isn't a good life, Emily. It's a starting point," he had retorted, gesturing around the room with contempt. "I want more for us. Don't you want more?" "I want a partner," she had said quietly, "not a business plan." He hadn't understood her then. He'd seen her words as a weakness, a refusal to engage with his vision of success. Now he saw it was a plea for him to see her, to value what they had beyond its monetary or status potential. He had failed completely. He got his drink, a double Scotch neat, and found a quiet corner to stand alone. The reflection in the large glass window showed a man in an expensive suit who looked lost and small. The wedding reception was moving into the main hall, a grand cathedral-like room with exposed wooden beams and glittering chandeliers. Music started to drift out, a live band playing a smooth jazz standard. Brittany found him, her anger having cooled into a brittle, strategic calm. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low. "Not here, Brittany." "Yes, here. Now," she insisted. "You lied to me. You didn't just lie. You created a completely false narrative about your past. The simple librarian. Was any of it true?" "It was my perception of it," he defended weakly. "When we were married, she was what? Not yet married to a billionaire?" Brittany's eyes were hard. "This changes things, Reed. This changes everything. Do you know how humiliating this is for me? People are looking at me, then looking at her. They're making comparisons, and I'm coming out on the losing end. Our brand, my brand, is built on aspiration, on having the best. And you, my fiancé, are the man who let the best get away." The word brand grated on him. Was that all they were? A brand, a carefully marketed image of success. He looked from Brittany's furious face to the entrance of the hall, where Emily and Julian were being greeted warmly by the bride's parents. There was nothing performative about them. They were just two people deeply in love, moving through the world with a quiet confidence that made Reed's ostentatious life feel like a cheap imitation. "I need some air," he said, turning and walking away from her, away from the music and the laughter and the crushing weight of his own stupidity. He found himself on a small, secluded balcony overlooking the rows of grapevines stretching out like dark ribbons under the moonlight. The cool night air did little to clear his head. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, and the bars were forged from his ego. He had always seen his life as a constant upward trajectory. Leaving Emily was a necessary sacrifice for that climb. He had convinced himself that she was happy in her small world, and he was happy in his large one. But seeing her tonight, so radiant and powerful in her own right, he understood the profound nature of his miscalculation. He hadn't climbed out of a valley. He had been standing on a mountain, mistaken it for a foothill, and leapt willingly into a chasm, convincing himself all the way down that he was flying. And now, at the bottom, he was finally looking up, seeing the person he left behind silhouetted against the stars, in a place he could now never hope to reach. The Scotch did little to numb the turmoil in Reed's mind. It only sharpened the edges of his regret, honing it into a fine point of resentment. He couldn't stand it any longer. The whispers, the pitying looks, the sight of Emily living a life that should have been, in some twisted way, a lesser version of his own. He needed to talk to her. He needed to understand. He needed to puncture the serene, perfect bubble that surrounded her. He left the balcony and re-entered the reception hall. The band was playing a more upbeat tune now, and some couples were on the dance floor. He scanned the room, his eyes finding Emily almost immediately. She was standing near the towering wedding cake, speaking with Jessica. Julian was nowhere in sight. This was his chance. As he approached, a waiter offered him another glass of champagne. He took it, downing half of it in one go. Liquid courage. Jessica saw him coming, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before her bridal training kicked in. "Reed, are you enjoying yourself?" she asked brightly. "Immensely," he lied. "Jessica, could I possibly borrow Emily for just a moment?" An old friend, wanting to say a proper hello. Jessica glanced nervously at Emily, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course. I need to go find my husband anyway. Don't let him have too much cake before we cut it." She bustled off, leaving an unnerving silence in her wake. "What do you want, Reed?" Emily asked. Her voice was not unkind, but it was devoid of warmth. It was the voice one uses for a necessary but unpleasant task. I wanted to talk," he began, gesturing vaguely. "This is all a bit of a shock." "I imagine it is," she said, her expression unreadable. "You always did like to be the most successful person in the room." The comment was so astute, so surgically precise that it caught him off guard. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" she replied, a single eyebrow arching slightly. "You left me because my lack of ambition was holding you back. You painted me as a small person, destined for a small life, so that your decision to leave would look like a heroic leap towards greatness. Don't deny it. It's the story you told yourself, and I'm sure it's the story you've told everyone else." He was speechless. She had dissected his entire motivation in a few calm sentences. "It wasn't like that," he stammered, the lie tasting foul. I was young. I didn't know what I wanted." "Oh, I think you knew exactly what you wanted," she countered, her voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "You wanted applause. You wanted a life that looked good on paper. You wanted a partner who was an accessory, not a person. I was never going to be that for you." A surge of his old arrogance flared up, a desperate defense mechanism. "And this is better? This life, following a billionaire around the world? Is this your ambition?" He wanted to hurt her, to imply she was a gold digger, to bring her down to a level where he could understand her. But Emily didn't flinch. "You think this is about Julian's money, don't you?" She gave a small, sad shake of her head. "That's your tell, Reed. You can only see the world through the lens of status and wealth. You can't possibly comprehend anything else." She took a step closer, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of the old Emily, the passionate woman he had once loved, beneath the polished exterior. "Let me tell you what Julian gave me," she said, her voice low and intense. "He saw me. Not who he wanted me to be, but who I was. He listened when I talked about my dream of starting a foundation to fund literacy programs in underprivileged communities. You laughed at that idea. You called it a cute hobby. Julian saw it as a viable, world-changing enterprise. He didn't fund it for me. He mentored me. He taught me how to write a business proposal, how to lobby for investors, how to manage a budget. The Rhodes Literacy Foundation now operates in 12 states, Reed. I built that. My ambition wasn't lacking. Your vision was." Every word was a nail in the coffin of his self-deception. He had not only underestimated her, He had actively tried to suppress the very qualities that had now allowed her to flourish. "The difference between you and him," she continued, "is that you wanted a woman who would stand behind you and applaud your success. Julian wanted a woman who would stand beside him as his equal. I wasn't the one who was too small, Reed. Your idea of a partnership was." Just then, a calm voice cut through the tension. "Is everything all right here, my love?" Julian had appeared at her side, his presence instantly changing the dynamic. He didn't look at Reed with anger, but with a cool, protective assessment. His hand found Emily's, their fingers lacing together naturally. "Everything is fine, darling," Emily said, her body relaxing into his side. "Reed and I were just catching up." Julian's gaze shifted to Reed. The quiet power in his eyes was more unnerving than any open threat. It was the look of a man who owned the board, the pieces, and the room the game was being played in. "Mr. Carr," Julian said, his tone level, "I am a firm believer that the past should remain there. Emily is my wife, and her happiness is my primary concern. I trust this conversation has contributed to that." It was a dismissal wrapped in the thinnest veneer of civility. It was an unmistakable message. "You are done here." Reed felt a hot flush of shame and impotence. He was completely outmaneuvered, outclassed, and outmatched. He had come over here seeking what? An explanation? An apology? A chance to reassert some form of dominance? Instead, he had been handed a comprehensive and devastating summary of his own failures as a man. "Yes, of course," Reed muttered, taking a step back. "Congratulations to you both." He turned and walked away, not daring to look back. He felt their eyes on him, a unified front of quiet strength. He headed straight for the bar, ignoring Brittany, who was watching him from across the room with a look of pure fury. He needed more scotch. He needed to drown out the sound of Emily's words, the truth that was now screaming in his ears. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a queen, because he had been too small a man to recognize her crown. The rest of the wedding reception passed in a hazy, alcohol-fueled nightmare for Reed. He avoided the dance floor, avoided conversation, and most of all, avoided looking in Emily and Julian's direction. He found a seat at an empty table in the back of the hall and proceeded to drink methodically and with a grim sense of purpose. Each sip of scotch was a futile attempt to silence the voice of regret that had taken up permanent residence in his head. Brittany, however, was not one to be ignored. After about an hour of his self-imposed exile, she marched over to his table, her movements sharp and angry. She slammed her clutch purse down on the table, the sound making him jump. "That's it," she said, her voice a low, controlled fury. "We're leaving." "The wedding's not over," he mumbled, gesturing with his glass. "Oh, it is for us," she snapped. "Do you have any idea the spectacle you've made of yourself? Of us? First, you spend the evening hiding in a corner like a punished child. Then you go and confront her. I saw you, Reed. I saw the way her new husband came and put you in your place like you were nothing, and you just stood there and took it. You don't understand what was said," he shot back, his own anger rising to meet hers. "I don't need to. I understand what it looked like. It looked like my fiancé is still pathetically obsessed with the ex-wife he claimed was a nobody. It looked like you're jealous. It looked weak." The word weak hung in the air between them, an accusation more potent than any other. Reed's entire self-image was built on the foundation of being strong, decisive, a winner. To be called weak by the woman he'd chosen specifically to reflect his strength was the ultimate insult. "Don't talk to me about weakness," he sneered, the alcohol making him reckless. You're the one who can't stop talking about her husband's money. You're the one who sees people as networking opportunities. And you don't? She scoffed, leaning forward, her eyes blazing. Don't you dare try to take the moral high ground with me, Reed. Your whole life is a networking opportunity. Our whole relationship is a networking opportunity. You chose me because I look good on your arm and on your social media feed. Because I fit the brand. Don't pretend this is some grand romance. The brutal honesty of her words sobered him slightly. She was right. He had chosen her as an accessory, the same way he'd chosen his car and his penthouse. He had just never expected the accessory to call him out on it. This is not the time or the place, he said, trying to regain control. No, it's the perfect time and place, she hissed, because I'm looking at her, and I'm looking at you, and I'm looking at me, and the math isn't adding up. You told me a story about who you were and what you wanted, and it was all a lie. You didn't leave her to find something better. You left her because you were too stupid to realize you already had it. And that insecurity is a stench I can smell all the way from here. She stood up, grabbing her purse. I'm getting a car. I'll wait for you outside. You have 5 minutes to pull yourself together before I leave you here. She walked away without a backward glance, her stilettos clicking an angry rhythm on the polished floor. Reed sat there, stunned. The cracks in his perfect, curated life had become gaping chasms. Brittany had seen right through him, not because she was particularly insightful, but because his facade had been so utterly demolished that even she could see the pathetic, insecure man hiding behind it. Their relationship, which he'd seen as a symbol of his success, was just as hollow as he was. It was a business arrangement, and tonight he had proven himself to be a very bad investment. He finished his drink and stood up, his legs unsteady. As he made his way towards the exit, his path inadvertently took him past the dance floor. The band was playing a slow, romantic ballad, and there in the center of the floor were Julian and Emily. They were dancing, moving as one, lost in their own world. Julian was whispering something in her ear, and she tilted her head back and laughed, the same genuine, beautiful laugh he'd heard earlier. He watched as Julian's hand rested on her waist, his thumb stroking the silk of her dress. It was a gesture of such profound love and tenderness that it physically hurt Reed to watch. This wasn't about the money. This wasn't about the status. This was about connection. It was about a man who saw the universe in a woman, and a woman who felt safe enough to shine like the sun. It was everything he and Emily never had, because he had been incapable of it. And it was everything he and Brittany would never have, because their foundation was built on sand. He turned away and walked out of the hall, out of the wedding, and into the cool, indifferent night. He felt a profound and desolate loneliness, the kind that comes from the absolute certainty of having made a life-altering, irreversible mistake. The gilded cage he had worked so hard to build for himself was now his prison, and he had just been handed a life sentence. Brittany was waiting by the valet stand, her arms crossed, her expression unforgiving. The ride back to the hotel would be silent, but Reed knew a louder, more painful argument was on the horizon. His perfect life was officially over. The days following the wedding were a tense, cold war. Reed and Brittany flew back to the city in near total silence. The air in their shared penthouse, once a symbol of their modern, successful life, was now thick with resentment. Brittany spent her time locked in her home office, communicating with Reed through curt, clipped text messages. He knew she was reassessing her brand, and he was painfully aware that he was now a liability to it. Reed tried to throw himself back into work, hoping the familiar rhythms of spreadsheets and conference calls could drown out the memory of the wedding. But even there, the ghost of Julian Rhodes loomed. The world of finance and tech was small. Rhodes's name was everywhere. A new acquisition, a groundbreaking patent, a keynote speech that shifted market sentiment. Before, Reed had seen these as distant events in a world above his own. Now, they felt deeply, personally humiliating. About 2 weeks after the wedding, Reed walked into his Monday morning team meeting, coffee in hand, ready to outline the quarterly strategy. His boss, a sharp, no-nonsense man named David, called the room to order. "All right, everyone, settle down," David began, his tone unusually grave. "Before we get to the quarterly projections, I have some major company news. As of 7:00 a.m. this morning, a deal was finalized. Our parent company, Vidian Holdings, has been acquired." A murmur went through the room. Acquisitions could mean anything from promotions and new resources to mass layoffs. "Acquired by who?" someone asked. David took a deep breath. "By Rhodes Capital." The name slammed into Reed with the force of a battering ram. He felt the blood drain from his face. It couldn't be. Of all the investment firms, of all the capital groups in the world, it had to be his. Julian Rhodes's private investment and venture capital firm. Rhodes's firm has been looking to expand its fintech portfolio for a while now, David continued, oblivious to Reed's internal collapse. "This is an incredible opportunity for us. The resources, the technology, the network we now have access to. It's a game changer. Julian Rhodes himself will be addressing the senior leadership via video conference on Wednesday." The rest of the meeting was a drone in Reed's ears. His colleagues were buzzing with excitement, speculating about the future, about the potential for growth. All Reed could think about was the exquisite, soul-crushing irony. He had built his career at this company. It was the source of his pride, the proof that he was a serious, successful man. And now it belonged to Julian Rhodes. He would be, in effect, working for Emily's husband. He stumbled back to his office, closing the door and sinking into his chair. Was this personal? Was it a calculated move? A power play designed to grind him under the heel of Rhodes's boot? He tried to imagine Julian and Emily sitting in their mansion, laughing as they planned this. "Let's buy the company where her pathetic ex-husband works. It'll be amusing." But as the initial shock subsided, a colder, more devastating realization took its place. It wasn't personal. That was the truly galling part. To Julian Rhodes, Reed's company was just another asset on a balance sheet, a strategic acquisition to strengthen a portfolio. Reed Carr himself was probably not even a name Julian remembered from the wedding. He was a footnote, an insignificant detail in the life of the woman Julian loved. The acquisition wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of complete and total indifference. He was so beneath Julian's notice that his entire professional life could be bought and sold without a second thought. That was the ultimate power play. When he got home that evening, the penthouse felt even colder and emptier than before. Brittany was in the living room, packing a suitcase. Not a weekend bag, a large, hard-shell suitcase. "What's this?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I'm moving out," she said, not looking at him. She was folding a silk blouse with meticulous, angry precision. "I'm going to stay at my sister's place for a while." "Brittany, we can talk about this." "No, we can't," she said, finally looking up at him. Her eyes were cold. "I got a call from a friend at your company this afternoon. She told me the news about Rhodes Capital." "It's just business," he said weakly. "Everything is business, Reed," she exclaimed, throwing the blouse into the suitcase. "Don't you get it yet? Perception is reality. The perception is that my fiancé is now, for all intents and purposes, working for his ex-wife's new husband, the man he foolishly left. It's not a good look. It's a pathetic look. And I will not have my life, my career, my brand associated with pathetic. There it was again. The brand. So that's it? He asked. After 2 years, you're just walking out. I'm making a strategic decision, she corrected him, her voice dripping with the corporate jargon they both use to speak so fluently. I'm cutting my losses on an investment that has proven to be a catastrophic failure. You're damaged goods, Reed, and I can't afford the association. She snapped the suitcase shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. She walked over to the small table by the door, took off the large diamond ring, and placed it down with a soft click. I believe this belongs to you, she said. She wheeled her suitcase to the door without looking back. Goodbye, Reed. The door closed behind her, the lock engaging with a final, definitive thud. Reed stood alone in the center of the vast living room, surrounded by the expensive, minimalist furniture that suddenly felt like props on an empty stage. He looked at the ring on the table, a gaudy symbol of a future that had just been cancelled. In the space of 2 weeks, his entire world had been dismantled. His fiancée was gone. His professional autonomy was a sham. The carefully constructed identity of Reed Carr, self-made man of success, had been exposed as a fragile, hollow shell. And the architects of his destruction hadn't even had to lift a finger. They were simply living their lives, and the sheer gravitational pull of their happiness and success had been enough to tear his flimsy universe apart. He was adrift, and for the first time in his adult life, he had no idea which way was up. Wednesday arrived with a sense of grim inevitability. Reed sat in the main boardroom with the rest of the senior leadership, staring at the large screen at the head of the table. He had barely slept, his nights filled with a revolving door of anxieties. The screen flickered to life, and Julian Rhodes's face appeared, crisp and clear in high definition. He was in an office, but it looked less like a corporate suite and more like a comfortable, light-filled study, with books and what looked like a framed, hand-drawn sketch on the wall behind him. "Good morning, everyone," Julian began, his voice as calm and authoritative as Reed remembered. "I trust you've all been briefed on the acquisition. I want to start by saying that Rhodes Capital is not here to dismantle what you've built. We're here to enhance it." He spoke for 20 minutes about synergy, innovation, and long-term growth strategies. He was articulate, visionary, and genuinely impressive. He laid out a future for the company that was more ambitious and exciting than anything David had ever proposed. There was no hint of gloating, no personal agenda. It was just business, executed at the highest possible level. At the end of the presentation, he took a few questions. As David was thanking him, a woman's silhouette passed briefly in the background of Julian's video feed. She placed a cup of coffee on his desk, her hand briefly touching his shoulder. It was Emily. Julian's expression softened for a split second as he looked up at her, a silent exchange passing between them before his professional demeanor returned. The image was seared into Reed's brain. Emily, at home in the heart of this global empire, a quiet, integral part of it all. It wasn't a show of power, it was just a glimpse into their life, a life of shared partnership, quiet support, and immense, unshakable success. After the call ended, the boardroom was abuzz with energy. People were excited, energized by Julian's vision. Reed felt nothing but a profound emptiness. He was a ghost at the feast. He knew he couldn't stay. He couldn't work for Julian Rhodes. He couldn't spend his days in an organization where his own personal failure was so deeply and structurally embedded. Every success for the company would be another reminder of what he had thrown away. That afternoon, he typed up his resignation. He kept it short and professional, citing a desire to pursue new opportunities. He handed it to David, who looked surprised but didn't press him. In a company now owned by Julian Rhodes, a man like Reed Carr was easily replaceable. He spent the next few days packing up his office, the artifacts of his career feeling like relics from another man's life. On his last day, he walked out of the building and didn't look back. The weeks that followed were a long, slow descent. He put the penthouse on the market, knowing he could no longer afford it without his salary, and moved into a much smaller, anonymous apartment across town. The Porsche felt ridiculous parked in the standard-sized spot, a monument to his former hubris. He sold it, taking a significant loss. He tried networking, calling old contacts, but the news of his abrupt departure from a newly acquired, high-profile company raised questions he couldn't answer. He was adrift, his professional identity erased, his personal life a wasteland. He was alone with his thoughts, and they were merciless, replaying every bad decision, every arrogant assumption, every moment of blindness that had led him to this point. The silence in his new apartment was deafening. There was no Brittany planning their next social engagement, no work calls to distract him. There was only the quiet and the crushing weight of his regret. One rainy Sunday afternoon, months later, he was browsing a bookstore, a habit he hadn't indulged in for years. He was passing a display of new non-fiction when a book caught his eye. The cover was a simple, elegant design with the title, "Opening the Chapter," a new model for global literacy. The author's name was printed in clean, bold letters below it, Emily R. Rhodes. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. The author photo on the back flap was of the Emily he'd seen at the wedding, poised, smiling, her intelligent eyes looking directly at the camera. The biography described her as the founder of the Rhodes Literacy Foundation and a leading advocate for educational reform. He bought the book. That night, he sat in his small, quiet apartment and read it from cover to cover. It was brilliant. It was insightful, well-researched, and passionately argued. It was the culmination of all the ideas she had tried to talk to him about years ago, the ones he had dismissed as cute hobbies. It was the work of a serious, powerful mind. Her mind. Closing the book, he finally understood. His downfall was not Julian Rhodes's fault. It was not Emily's fault. It was his and his alone. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had misjudged the very nature of success. He had chased the shimmering, hollow image of it, while she had quietly built the real thing. He would likely never see her again. Their worlds no longer intersected. She was on a trajectory that was stratospheric, while he was on the ground, starting over. But for the first time, the thought didn't fill him with bitterness or jealousy. It filled him with a strange, painful sense of clarity. He had been a chapter in her life, a prologue even, but she was now writing an epic novel, and his story. His story was about a man who had to lose everything to finally learn how to read, and so Reed's story ends, not with a bang, but with the quiet turning of a page. He thought he was the protagonist of a grand success story, only to realize he was a cautionary tale. It's a powerful reminder that the brightest futures are often built not on what we acquire, but on who we value and how we see them. True success isn't about flaunting a perfect life. It's about finding a partner who helps you build a meaningful one. Emily found that, not in wealth, but in a man who saw her worth all along. Reed learned his lesson in the harshest way possible. What did you think of Reed's journey? Was his downfall deserved, or was he just a product of a world obsessed with appearances? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates a good drama. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that make you think. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.